Questions 38 to 41 are about a Victorian text, what seems to be, which is a series of instructions from a senior devil to a junior one. And question 38 asks us to explain what exactly the senior devil is explaining. What is the gist of the explanation in the first paragraph? Now, the key lines of interest to us here are towards the end of the first paragraph, which says the attack has a much better chance of success when the man's inner world is drab and cold and empty. This is really all we need to answer the question. Now, if the devil's attack has the best chance of success when a man is unhappy, we can infer that it has the least chance of success when he is happy. So which of the statements offered to us, A, B, C, or D, is the closest to that statement? The closest statement is A. It is counterproductive to try to use the patient's happiness against him. In other words, if you are a devil, don't touch that man while he is happy. Get him while he's weak, while he is miserable. If we then look at statements B, C, and D, we actually see that they all more or less paraphrase the same proposition, and that proposition is the incorrect one. It is signaling the opposite of what the devil is actually saying. You shouldn't break down the patient's resistance when it is at its strongest. You have to work too hard for it. Wait till he is miserable. Is it futile to target the patient while he is miserable? Well, no, it's quite the opposite. When the patient is miserable is exactly when he should be targeted. Should you take advantage of the patient while he is happy? No, leave him alone. Wait until he is unhappy and then break down his resistance, because that is when it is easiest. Now, according to this passage, the devil's ultimate goal is to make the religious man lose his faith. So which passage, asks question 39, would be an appropriate passage of scripture that would help the devil achieve that goal? Would it be a passage that gave the patient a false sense of piety and security? This would not be in line 21, because that would be appropriate for the hopeful type of patient. But line 21, in fact, deals with the despairing type of patient. So this one is irrelevant to us. Is it C, making the patient believe that his faith was growing ever stronger? That is the opposite of what the devil is intending to do. Is it D, allowing the patient to remain unaware of his growing disillusionment? Well, he is aware. That is why he is despairing. So D is out of the question as well. Now, B, making the patient strive for goals that he was incapable of achieving, is our correct answer. The goal he is incapable of achieving is constancy in faith, because that is an impossible task. Faith, according to this passage, is always fluctuating. That is a natural thing. And if you direct the man towards passages in scripture that set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his old feelings, i.e., recovering a very strong faith through sheer willpower, that is a task doomed to fail, and therefore the devil will have achieved his objective. Question 40 asks us why the devil recommends to the junior devil to keep the man away from experienced Christians. What is it that experienced Christians would reveal to the man that would not be beneficial to the devil? This question is an inference question. That means you will not find a direct quotation to point to. You need to collect evidence from a number of places within this second paragraph. So let's get to work. We need first to understand the context. The context is that the man who is a recent convert to Christianity is now beginning to experience a weakening of his faith. Now we can see in lines 13, 14 that he had expected that ardor that comes with first finding faith to last forever. And when it turned out not to have lasted forever. The man is now terrified that his lack of faith, his present dryness, as the text calls it, will last forever instead. Now, we know that this is taken by the devil to be false because it is then called a misconception that a man gets well fixed in his head, or the devil helps him to get well fixed in his head, from which we infer that fluctuations in faith are normal. And of course, anybody who has been a Christian for an extended period of time, i.e., an experienced Christian, would know this. So you have to keep the man out of contact with experienced Christians, because they would let the man know that questioning one's faith is natural and inevitable, i.e., C. Not all temptations are damaging. There is nothing to suggest that, so D is out. How to avoid temptations that lead to a loss of faith. Again, nothing to suggest that. And how to maintain his faith without needing to question it. A. That is directly contradictory to the thesis here, because questioning one's faith is, as the devil himself admits, a natural condition of being a Christian. Question 41 asks us to zoom out, consider the passage as a whole, and decide on its purpose. What is it trying to communicate to the reader? Is it trying to show that spirituality can be lively and humorous? Now, we may well find some humor in this passage, but on the whole, its subject matter is suffering. It is looking for faith. It is despairing over lost or fluctuating faith. So lively it may be, but humorous. There is just too much pain and suffering in there for that to be the main purpose. Is it to expose the superficiality of conventional religion? Now, the devil does not criticize conventional religion for being superficial. It is talking about men who are looking desperately to find their faith again. So perhaps towards the very end, when the devil is talking about the hopeful type who can abandon religion fairly easily, that may be a secondary function, but it is by far not the main function of this passage. Is it to confront readers with their lack of faith? The passage in a way treats the lack of faith as an important topic, and what it is saying is that undulation, fluctuations in faith, questioning your faith are a normal part of having faith. Even the devil admits this. So this is not correct either. Is it, D, to alert readers to spiritual dangers? If you look at lines 1 and 2, the devil begins by saying, I have always found that the trough periods of undulation provide excellent opportunity for temptations. So undulation, the idea of waves, of faith coming in waves, of it coming up and down, just like most things in life, is something that the devil is going to use to tempt humans when their faith is down. So the purpose of this passage to the reader, what is the purpose of this story of presenting this devil talking about what I use to tempt humans, is to alert readers to spiritual dangers, i.e. to alert readers that when their faith fluctuates, while that may be normal, while that may be something that all experienced Christians know and have gone through, it is a dangerous period, because that is when you are most likely to be tempted by the devil. So therefore, D is your correct answer. In question 42, we have a cartoon of a woman crying outside an intensive care waiting area and a doctor standing over her. So because she's crying, because it is the ICU, we presume that somebody has just died and the doctor is announcing the death. However, the surprise, the humor, the punchline comes from the fact that instead of saying, I am very sorry, your husband or your father, your mother, your aunt, anybody is no longer with us, the doctor is saying, I was able to get in one last lecture about diet and exercise. Now, one would think that on your deathbed, a lecture about diet and exercise is no longer useful, and that is the joke of the cartoon. Does the doctor appear A, distracted? Not exactly, because he is on point. He is talking about the right patient. He is not talking about something irrelevant. Does he appear uncaring? You could say he is the opposite of uncaring because he lectures the patient about diet and exercise to the very last. His belief in diet and exercise is so strong that he will really take any opportunity to try to instill the importance of that belief on his patients. Does he appear blunt? Now, blunt would be direct. This would be saying things as they are. He would appear blunt if he had come up to the woman and said, "Your husband is dead." That would be blunt and direct. That is not what we see him saying at this point. Now, what he does appear as is fixated, and this is the wonderful verbal irony going on here that gives the cartoon its humor, because he is absolutely obsessed with the idea of diet and exercise to the point where he lectures patients in the intensive care unit when they really couldn't care less about diet or exercise. Questions 43 to 48 examine a passage on liberalism and present a number of quite complex questions in political philosophy. So let's take a look at question 43 that asks us to look at lines 1 and 2 to see what Alexis de Tocqueville argued about liberal theory. Lines 1 and 2 tell us that while Alexis de Tocqueville espoused a humanitarian perspective on political and social issues, i.e., he espoused a perspective that respected people equally simply for the fact of being human, he nonetheless supported violent conquest, domination, and civilization of Algeria. So there is a contradiction in there, which means that his liberal theory was applied to different people in different ways. A is your correct answer. Options B and C are irrelevant because we are not contrasting here the society versus the individual, which is what options B and C are about. And option D is contradictory to what is being said about liberal theory, according to Alexis de Tocqueville, because it is saying it was applied in the same way to all people, regardless of their actual needs. It does not pick up on that contradiction within liberal theory as he saw it. Question 44 is about liberal theory as it is presented in the first paragraph. Now, the first paragraph begins by pointing out the contradiction in the thought of Alexis de Tocqueville, which we saw in the preceding question. It then goes on to say that liberal discourse of human rights developed in a context in which some people were judged not ready to be free, others needed to be forced to be free. And it concludes that liberal theory has included a particular stance towards governing those who, if you like, were deemed incapable of governing themselves. It describes a contradiction, a tension within liberal thought. Does it describe liberalism as an obsolete political experiment? There's nothing to suggest that it is considered obsolete by the author at the time of writing. In fact, he's still talking about liberalism in the present tense. He says has included. Does it say that it is a well-balanced philosophical theory? It says the opposite of that because it points to something that liberalism has not worked out. Does it say that it is an unaccountable moral conundrum? We need to be careful with the term moral here because the contradiction it is describing from a theoretical or political stance. It is not really talking about morality. Therefore, your correct answer is B. It is a curious political paradox. The paradox, the contradiction between, on the one hand, everybody needing to be free and having equal rights, and on the other hand, enforcing that freedom on others. along with other paradoxes hinted at in this paragraph, make B the correct answer. Question 45 is about the second paragraph and what the writer says in it about liberal rights. Is he saying that they are irrelevant anachronisms? No, we already established that he does not believe that they are irrelevant, obsolete, or anachronistic. Is he saying that they represent the moral foundation upon which a just society can be based? He is not so optimistic. He is saying that liberalism, if you like, has a twisted sense of justice. Is he saying that liberal rights have been in conflict with more powerful social forces since their inception? In fact, what he's saying is that liberal rights have been in cahoots with these forces since their inception. Take a look at paragraph 2. He's saying we cannot pretend that this talk of liberal individualism, this talk of human rights, is neutral, that it is universal, or that it is separate from the economic and political interests of the West. Far from saying that liberal rights are in conflict with these powerful social forces, he is saying, in fact, these two have gone hand in hand from the start. Option C, on the other hand, specific social constructions which perpetuate that society's ends, is exactly what we are looking for. And if you are in doubt about these being social constructions, what should convince you is the mention of that society. We are talking here about, in particular, Western capitalist society, imperialist society. So it is being in cahoots with that society and perpetuating that particular social and economic order is what is being said about liberal rights, about the liberal order in this paragraph. To answer question 46, we need to examine the statement that liberal rights are not liberating in some objective sense, from which it follows that they are liberating in a subjective, in a specific sense of some sort. The paragraph goes on to say that liberal rights developed hand in hand with ideas of colonialism, imperialism, modern means of production. That means that liberal rights function within a certain kind of system, and the freedom that they afford you only functions within the parameters of the said system. Let's look at which of the four options most closely approximates that idea. Is it A, that liberal rights are often unwanted? This may or may not be true, but it would be external knowledge. It is not what this paragraph is talking about. Is it that they are often taken for granted, as B suggests? There is no suggestion of that in the text. Is it that they involve unfathomable obligations? Is it that they place unthinkable, unimaginable obligations on one? It's not clear why unfathomable would be used, since the author is taking pains to explain to us what kind of obligations they involve. However, the obligations in question are unexamined obligations because we are not conscious of having these obligations. We're very conscious of having rights within a liberal society, a society that defines itself as liberal. But we do not realize, so the author says, that these rights come alongside obligations because they work towards perpetuating the same system. In question 47, we are invited to deal with a contradiction that not everyone has equal rights all of the time. Remember, liberal theory, as it has been explained to us, rests on the proposition that everybody is equal and everybody must have the same rights. However, the question asks us, what do liberal theorists do when they are confronted with the reality, not everybody has the same rights? How do liberal theorists deal with this contradiction, this gap between what they are professing and what is actually going on? Is it that they are A, confronting weaknesses in their theory by re-evaluating its function? There is very little said about the function of liberalism. We are talking here specifically about human rights, and there is no suggestion that the function of the theory, whatever that might mean, is being reevaluated. Is it B, that they avoid unwanted interpretations of their theory by increasing transparency? Now, the word transparency here is very odd. It is governments and policies that have transparency, not theories. Is it C, that they simplify their theory to generate uncertainty? This should at once strike you as paradoxical. How would simplifying your theory generate uncertainty? Maybe rendering the theory more complex would generate uncertainty. The correct answer is D, altering the boundaries, because that is what liberal theorists do, according to the author, when confronted with this contradiction. So if you say that everybody should have equal rights, but you then are confronted with the reality that not only does everybody not have equal rights, but you are somewhat responsible in their not having equal rights. What do? According to the author, liberal theorists alter the boundaries by altering the meaning of everybody, by altering the application of liberal rights to people. Some are then defined as not being ready to be everybody, or in fact, not being everybody, not being part of the fully human race. It sounds awful, but that is exactly what the author is accusing liberal theorists of. So you alter the meaning of everybody to make sure that your theory of everybody having equal rights still applies. The passage ends by saying that in addition to altering the boundaries, liberal theorists sometimes use another strategy, which is simply to pretend that everybody does have equal rights, even though lived experience makes it clear that they do not. And we are asked what the author thinks about this strategy. The key word here is the word threatens in the penultimate line of the passage. This category threatens to be quite capacious in the modern world. So we know that the author perceives this strategy as a threat. Let's take a look at the options we've got. D, an unfortunate necessity, immediately rings false, because if something is a threat, it cannot be considered simultaneously to be an unfortunate necessity. We know clearly that the author is being critical of this strategy, so there is no indication that it is necessary in any way. Is it C, deliberately divisive? Divisive would not be the best description, because the strategy tries to brush over divisions, to present divisions as inconsequential. It is dismissive of real divisions on the ground. Is it B, unenforceable? Now, something that you perceive as a threat, you would not want to enforce. So we would describe unenforceable as something that we think might be a good idea, but is in practice very difficult to implement. If you don't think it's a good idea, as the author clearly doesn't, because he uses the word threatens, it cannot be the correct answer, which leads us to disingenuous. And indeed, it is obviously paradoxical, dishonest to say that people have equal rights when you know full well that they don't. So disingenuous is the best fitting option and your correct answer.